Birds 365 here on the JAKIB Media YouTube channel. Thanks for streaming in with us today. We've got an able assistant joining us. One of our faves, Marcus Hayes from the Philadelphia Inquirer, always brings opinions when he jumps aboard. Here's where I want to start with you, Marcus, because I've always thought of you as a good judge of the room. Last year, this year, the Philadelphia Eagles were undefeated. They didn't have a hiccup like they did against the Jets a couple of weeks ago, but they're 6-1. They're tied for the best record in the National Football League. A lot of similarities between where they are in the standings compared to the other teams in the National Football League this year to last year. How different it all is the room this year for the Eagles as far as how they handle themselves in the locker room, motivational, just general camaraderie, confidence level, and the like. This year's room comparable to last year's room at this stage of the season?
No, last year's room was buoyant, jubilant. They were, I think they were a little surprised at how good they were. They expected to be respectable coming off a playoff appearance, but they had no idea that once the offensive line and Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown sort of got on the same page, that they would be dominant. And that's really what they were last year offensively, was dominant. And so they were happy. They were jubilant. This year, a ton is expected of them. The quarterback got paid. So he's got to be the guy. It's $255, right? You got to be $255 if you get paid $255.
Mm-hmm.
And he hasn't been, I don't know whether he's hurt. I don't know whether teams have figured him out, but he hasn't been nearly as effective or dynamic. Now, part of that, I think, is the rotating offensive line. Not that the replacements have been bad necessarily, just different. Their greatest power, their superpower as a franchise since 2013 when they hired Jeff Stoutland, has been they've had aggregate, maybe not every game or every season, but aggregate, they've had the best offensive line. That hasn't been the case most of this season yet, but the offensive line hasn't been as imperfect as the quarterback, who's been pretty imperfect. So to answer your question, last year they were happy. This year, I think they're a little worried. I think they're a little pressured. I think they're a little anxious. I would say anxious versus elated.
Yeah, I think a lot of people forget, and Marcus points out, the Eagles weren't expected to be one of the best teams in football coming into last season. All of a sudden, they turned into it pretty quickly, and the expectations weren't there. This time, the expectations are enormous each and every week, and not only just the quarterback, but on the entire franchise. And I think everybody, Nick kind of alluded to that, because Nick, and Marcus, he's very good about keeping things about this week, this day, get better, blah, blah, blah. And I was surprised he kind of admitted other stuff seeps in. You can't prevent it. And everybody knows the expectations. And I think that speaks to your point about the anxious nature of this. I don't know how that's human nature. And I think you're right. I think this team is tighter this year than they were last year. It's the way I would describe it. But I got to tell you, and I need Marcus Hayes to do this for me. Give me something bad to say about Howie Roseman.
The only thing you can say bad about Howie Roseman is that the bar of general managers and decision makers in the NFL is pretty
incredibly low, right?
Yeah.
Incredibly low.
So he's the Brobdingnagan in Lilliput. He's the giant among the tiny people.
Now, I love that. I love that reference. Spectacular, by the way.
And again, he's really good. He's really, really good. And he understands the value of now versus later. My biggest issue with the process people, the trust the process people, was that they were certain that all these draft picks were going to bear fruit.
Right.
Most don't. And the higher you pick, the bigger you hit, but also the bigger you miss.
Yeah.
You know, there have been busts in the last 15 years like we never saw before, mainly because you're essentially drafting high school players who didn't spend the year after high school developing. So I said that to say Howie loves draft picks, but he realizes that a good starting safety is more important than a fifth and a sixth round pick. And so now you have a starting safety.
Yeah.
And that's always been the case. You know, A.J. Brown cost them $100 million and a pick, and he's been a bargain.
Right.
You know, you can argue A.J. Brown's been the Bryce Harper of the Eagles. Incredibly expensive, but totally worth it on a lot of different levels.
And oh, by the way, Marcus, last night on WIP, I actually got a caller who is ready to start the process with the Phillies because they got beat. It's time to start to trade Bryce Harper, get rid of JT Realmuto, clean house. I'm going, and you lived through the process. You did this with the Sixers. And you want to go there again? Absolutely. Thank you very much.
And a lot of ways,
call somebody else's show. I don't need to listen to
I don't want to turn this into a Sam Hinkie thing, but in a lot of ways, he broke Philadelphia because everybody misses the point, and the goal is to ultimately win. And it's always about the future. Oh, you can't do that. You can't give up. As Marcus points out, and the NFL is different than the NBA. It's a little bit obviously different, but how does so many people not know that a two-time All-Pro safety, all right, he's 30 years old, he might not be quite what he was at 25, is better than a fifth and a sixth round pick? I mean, that to me,
especially in this town where we've had two elite 30-plus-year-old safeties in Brian Dawkins and Malcolm Jenkins. Yeah. You know, it's not like you're playing quarterback and you need to be able to backpedal and get your hips around at 32, which that might be an issue, you know, in the second half of the season with two of the guys that are here. But the reality is, if you're playing safety, you're going downhill generally. You're very seldom asked to do the sort of athletic things that cornerbacks are asked to do in space. So, yeah, to your callers, to respond to your caller, the Phillies have a better chance, I would say, right now, if Ranger Suarez and Christopher Sanchez work out, they've got a better chance of being contenders for the next 5 years than the Eagles do. Because the Eagles are old. You know, at some point, Jason Kelsey's going away, and Fletcher Cox is going away, and Lane Johnson's going away, and Darius Slay's going away. The Phillies, because baseball's prime begins later and lasts longer, the Phillies should be feared probably for the next 5 years. So the absolute opposite is true. They're just arriving to their prime.
Yeah. Tear it down, Marcus.
Well, the Hinkie thing,
that call last night.
The Hinkie discussion is interesting because they hit the sweet spot of relative frustration, but also social media explosion. The process is very largely a radio and social media driven entity. Most people in Philadelphia had no interest in losing on purpose for even 1 or 2 years, much less 4 or 5. And that's what it became. When we asked them over and over again, what is the plan? And they kept saying there is no plan.
No timeline.
Then, you know, but again, the social media aspect wasn't the launch. It was the commitment. Once you were part of the cult, you couldn't admit you were wrong because there were years of evidence.
Now you're 100. By the way, you're 100% right. It became a religion. It became a cult, and they were always going to move the finish line. Right. First, it was about championships. Then it was about relevancy. Then it was about, well, they got good players. Yeah, we all know. The irony of this, and I'll take it back to NFL general managers as a whole, because you have this whole influx of a younger group of GMs who all think the same way, Marcus. It's this groupthink sort of mentality, but they all somehow convince themselves they're also the smartest guys in the room, even though they stand among an echo chamber, essentially. And I always tell Jody, if everybody does the same thing, then it becomes much more difficult. Going back to, we're conflating all sports, but I always go back to baseball with Billy Beane. Well, he did it first, so he had an advantage. Then when everybody copied him, you no longer have the advantage. So I've always been most impressed when it comes to executives the guys who zig when everybody else is zagging. Like, I don't want the guy doing the same thing. I don't want that
To your
guy.
point, okay, probably the two most important innovators in the sports industry vis-a-vis analytics in the last, 30 years, 25 years, are Billy Beane and Daryl Morey. Daryl Morey, he's got the summit at MIT, right?
Yeah.
What if either of them ever won anywhere?
Yeah. People forget. Yeah. Billy won all those games in 104 games, and how many straight, Jody? I forget when they set the record, but they didn't win.
Right. They didn't win, and they haven't won. And look, you got to be able to pick good players. I mean, but Howie Roseman, this is why Howie is special. Okay. He sees the value in talent that's developable with character. So in the second round, he drafts Landon Dickerson and Cam Jurgens. And in the first round, he drafts Jordan Davis and Jalen Carter. Of all the people the Eagles have drafted in history, they might be, because of where he got them and who they're going to be, and maybe who they are already, they're going to be the biggest draft moves in Eagles history if they continue on this trajectory. Because all of them had these caveats, too small, been hurt, lingering issues, too fat. Well, guess what? Those are the guys you're building your roster around that's the new Fletcher Cox, Brandon Graham, Lane Johnson, and Jason Kelsey. Yeah. And that's why Howie's better than everybody else. And he understands that on both the offensive and defensive lines, he has coaches that can get the best out of these guys and let them be themselves, the best version of themselves, not make them into something they're not. And, one of the reasons Jeff Stoutland's still here is because Howie Roseman overpays him.
Yep.
If that's possible.
All right. We're putting Howie on a pedestal here. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve to be on one, because he is. But I almost feel the need to balance the scale. So let me just say this. Robert Quinn, 4th round pick. So Howie doesn't hit the ball out of the park every at bat, okay? Every once in a while, he takes a misstep.
I don't understand the reference. I don't think a lot of your listeners will either. What's the Robert Quinn 4th round pick?
Last year, you gave up a 4th round pick for a guy who came in and did the league squad. So I'm just saying Howie doesn't get it right every time. He hits at a higher percentage than anybody else, which makes him the best. Michael Jordan didn't shoot 1,000% from the field.
If your proof against Howie is a 4th round pick,
yeah,
then you
exactly
need to trust the process.
I've been saying that. I don't
need to
care.
trust the process.
Yeah. Because Jody and I have had that discussion. I still say that was a good decision. Like, I look at decisions, and you're going to get players wrong. Everybody, especially if you're around as long as Howie, personnel, everybody in the history of this sport has missed on draft picks. Everybody.
Look, you're talking about the asset you gave up is a guy you don't expect to sign to a second contract, who you hope is a backup and a special teamer.
Yeah.
I mean, you can argue that the biggest problem with that pick or with that deal is it took playing time away from someone else who might have played better. Right. But the pick's irrelevant. Once you get onto the third day or whatever, you're filling out rosters and throwing the dice.
Well, the thing I love about that, Marcus, is everybody will throw out, well, Jason Kelsey was a 6th round pick. All right, then go look at all the other 6th round picks.
That's ridiculous. Tom Brady and Jason Kelsey have ruined the conversation forever, mainly because if the Eagles thought Jason Kelsey was better than was worth more than a 6th round pick, they'd have spent more than a 6th round pick on him. Right. Same with the Patriots. Yeah. The Patriots and the Eagles were wrong for 5 rounds.
Yes. If you take Jason Kelsey in the first round, it's a huge success. Yeah.
Right. So you don't even want me besmirching Howie's name, as minimal a mistake as it was. Then let me go here. Right now, the Eagles are fine because Jalen Hurts and his balky knee, his banged up knee, he says he's fine. He's going to make it through. He's a tough guy, which he is. What if he catches it wrong on Saturday and he does some significant damage to us? Marcus Mariota to rescue. Now, I was with Howie Roseman during the offseason. I thought the Mariota signing was a good one. I thought it was actually an upgrade from Gardner Minshew. I thought he was going to come in and fit this offense and be able to give them maybe a better chance to win games if Jalen was going to miss. But then I saw the preseason, and John came on Birds 365 every day and said, yeah, he doesn't look good in practice. He's throwing the ball all over the place. It's just not good with Marcus Mariota when he goes in there. Sometimes you make mistakes. Howie doesn't make many of them. The coaching staff doesn't make many of them, but sometimes you make a mistake. And the good ones react to it, and they try and fix it. And Howie upgraded this that went different directions in the safety this offseason with Evans and Edmonds. And he got to a point and said, well, listen, I can get Kevin Byard. I'm going to go fix that. You make an evaluation, you look at it, you continue to evaluate, and sometimes you change in midstream. Have the Eagles messed up by not getting a better option at backup quarterback? We know it. We hope that it never comes into play. This Marcus Mariota gets to handle that clipboard all year long. But if Jalen's going to miss 2 games, 3 games, 4 games, did Howie not put enough efforts into getting a better backup quarterback and or fixing the one that he chose to begin with?
So this has always been my pet peeve of radio shows and podcasts, because unless your next sentence, Jody, is such as, and give me 3 examples, it's not a fair conversation. And number one. Number two, we don't know he's messed up. We saw Marcus Mariota play poorly with a group of guys he just met.
And he was playing shortstop as well, Marcus, because Brett Toth couldn't snap the football. So
and he wasn't playing with the frontline guys. So you never know about a backup quarterback. You don't really never know about any quarterback that's new to a system until he gets 5 or 6 games. And hopefully Marcus Mariota doesn't get 5 or 6 games.
Come on, Marcus, you know better than that. That's not the want of the league. You don't get that chance. Nobody gets that chance. Nobody gets to step in and play massive reps with his fellow starting teammates if the quarterback goes down. You have to kind of fly by the seat of your pants. That's the way the league is set up.
Yeah, well, here's what you do with
everybody else.
Here's what you do with backup quarterbacks.
No backup quarterback comes in and wins the MVP.
No.
I mean, Brock Purdy's the aberration, but Brock Purdy, is probably the 13th best player on his team. So, I don't expect no backup quarterback comes in and is spectacular until he gets his feet under him, which we've all seen over and over and over again. That's how Tom Brady came to exist, remember?
Yeah. Yeah.
And trust me, Tom Brady wasn't the best player on that team for probably the first 3 or 4 Super Bowls, much less the first 4 or 5 years. They had a really, really good squad. So, you need 4 or 5 just to evaluate. Not that the guy's going to be even any good. He's going to be up and down probably the first 4 or 5 games. So what you ask of a backup quarterback probably isn't even what you asked of Marcus Mariota in the preseason. You ask a backup quarterback to run a very, very condensed group of plays, a very, very condensed playbook for probably aggregate 150 or 200 plays over 3 or 4 games. So if they can execute those plays and he can actively not lose games, that's Marcus Mariota's job, to not lose the game, to have 1 interception per outing, even if you don't have a touchdown, to have 1 interception per outing. That's his only job. And we just don't know whether that's what he's going to be able to do. But I will say this, Jalen Hurts has now been hurt every single season he's played in the NFL. He had a hamstring injury at the end of his rookie year, and that's not why Nate Sudfeld went in, but he was injured. And he's had ankle surgeries the last 2 years. He had a shoulder issue, and now he's got a knee. Stop running him.
Yeah. Well, Jalen says it's not the running, Marcus. He gets hurt in the pocket, even though he got hurt running last year in Chicago. He kind of forgot that. But when it comes to backup quarterback, I'll say, and again, same thing we said with Kelsey and Tom Brady as draft picks. You bring up Tom Brady, Kurt Warner, Nick Foles here, making a run, Brock Purdy, as you brought up. Those are the exceptions, and generally your backup quarterback, I think Gardner Minshew is a slightly better backup quarterback than Marcus Mariota. but nobody liked Gardner Minshew, and they lost games. So you're generally screwed in the NFL when you have to go to the backup. And I still think Marcus is top 10 backup in the NFL because he's got experience. The moment's not going to be too big for him. I have no problem with him being the backup. I was just pointing out he didn't play that well in training camp. And there's a lot of reasons for that, starting with the fact that he's a better shortstop than Trey Turner because of all the work he got trying to pick up bad snaps. And that throws off the timing of the offense. Bottom line is you don't want him playing. That's fair to say. You don't want any backup quarterback playing unless you're Dick Vermeil and Trent Green gets hurt.
But we obsessed over this in the offseason because you knew Jalen was going to get hurt. Yeah. A backup quarterback for Jalen Hurts and other guys who get hurt, but a backup quarterback for Jalen Hurts might be more important than a backup quarterback for someone who gets hurt less, who puts himself in less in harm's way fewer times. And a lot of times Jalen runs, it's by, he chooses to run. He'll audible to a play. It'll be an RPO where he doesn't give the ball away or pass it. So, it's going to happen. And if that's your price of doing business, if that's what you will accept from your quarterback, so be it, But the backup quarterback for whoever Jalen Hurts' backup quarterback is probably going to get a chance or two to play.
We'll see. We'll see if that comes into play this week. Hoping not, Eagle fans, that we don't have to find out how good Marcus Mariota would be behind that Eagles offensive line, starting offensive line. Not Brett Toss snapping it to him. He'll go in and kick some tail against the Commanders this week. We'll see about that. Will the Eagles see the Commanders' backup quarterback this week? Sam Howell at some point's got to go down because their offensive line is terrible. He's getting killed on a weekly basis. 40 sacks through 6 games.
Yeah, he's on pace to break the record of David Carr, which I believe is 75 in Houston. And
that's a bye week.
Yeah.
Jeez. Yeah. He might break the record this weekend.
Yeah. I don't think he's going to make it.
Time out. I got to go here with you, Marcus. Set the under over yesterday to John 7. And who else was that? 7. Was it Gil? I think it was Gil.
Yeah.
Under over 7.5.
So
I said the number at 7.5 yesterday. How many sacks for the Eagles on Sunday?
I'm going under.
I said 7.
Yeah, I'm going under.
So you're under. I'm the only one who's going over. I think they're getting 8. I think Hassan's getting 4 all by himself.
Oh my gosh, I don't know. Maybe you've done some more better forensic investigation than I have of the matchups.
Yeah,
it's pretty damn.
I think the Eagles. Part of the problem is I think the Eagles' defensive front is so good that teams game plan to get the football out quicker. So the first time, that I think they had 5 sacks. I looked it up. What was it, Jody? 5, I believe.
5,
it was
3 by Nick Morrow.
And that was the Nick Morrow game. And even Sam Howell, they told him get the ball out, and it's a little bit skewed. If he held on to the ball, we might have like Carson Wentz last year. I had 9 down at FedEx Field, took 9 sacks. But teams are so scared of this defensive front, and you've seen it consistently. Kirk Cousins hangs on to the football, not against the Eagles. Ball was coming out. Tua gets the ball out quickly against everybody, got it out even quicker.
Part of that too is, when's the last time they've actually had a linebacker who could cover a running back or a tight end? It's just that's all that weak underbelly. I can't remember. What was it? Willie Thomas in the 90s?
Willie T.
Carlos Emmons in the early 2000s, something like that, where they had a weak side linebacker that would stay on the field and actually cover a tight end or a running back coming out of the backfield or coming off the line. But again, that seems to be the trade-off for the Eagles. They'll give you, 7 6-yard completions and a short field goal if you can execute, and they can't get to your quarterback, and they'll beat you, 28 to 15. You know what I mean? I think that's their play. That's their plan. That's their design. And it's not going to change. And I think what they hoped was that Nakobe Dean would be that guy. Usually it's a little bit longer, live, athletic guy than Nakobe, who's a great athlete but isn't very big. But I think they thought that they might have a guy who could cover a running back out of the backfield in Nakobe, and maybe they do. I'd love to see that. He is by far, and I don't really get excited about players they draft or whatever, even though during the national championship game I called them drafting Devontae Smith. Nakobe Dean is the guy whose career I'm most interested to see since they drafted Brian Dawkins in the second round. I think he could be horrible. He could be, never sign a second contract. But I think
that's
he could
interesting,
be a really
Marcus,
special player.
because I asked this of Jody yesterday, so I'll ask it of you. This team is obviously the Kevin Byard move. There's an incredible sense of urgency. Howie's trying to take advantage of this window. Mm-hmm. Nick Morrow's played well, but we all know Nakobe Dean's the long-term answer, and they believe that. But Nick Morrow has been tremendous, and Nakobe was kind of shaky last week. At what point does the meritocracy part of it come in, say, hey, we're going for a ring. We got to put the best player on the field right now. And I can't believe I'm saying this for a very small sample size. Right now, that's Nick Morrow. You go with the hot hands.
Well, I think this is the best way for every team in every sport to proceed. If you've got a player playing at a B level and a player playing at a C level, and the player playing at a C level is a greater long-term investment, whether it's money you paid him or a draft pick equity that you've invested in him, or just you think he's got talent. As long as the C level player gets a little bit better every week, then you go with the C level player, because at some point he's going to be better than a B level player. And especially if it's a position where, if you're on a team where you can win other ways, you see that, I think that's what you have to do. Because you see it happen with quarterbacks all the time, right? Bad quarterbacks, guys who can't play, get chance after chance after chance because of the investment. Now, the investment in Nakobe Dean isn't the investment that they have even in Jalen Hurts, as far as picks and money or whatever. When Jalen Hurts was like, well, is Jalen Hurts going to be a starter in this league, when we were having that conversation? But Nakobe Dean, to me, so far, hasn't been so much appreciably worse than Nick Morrow that he should be abandoned for this season. I think he's got a really high ceiling. I thought Dawkins had a really high ceiling, and Dawkins was not good the first couple of years. He was okay, but he wasn't good. But the Eagles drafted him because he was probably one of the 2 or 3 best athletes in that draft. And I think Nakobe Dean is one of the 2 or best athletes in the draft. Was it 2 years ago, right?
Yeah.
I may have to cede my position as president of the Nakobe Dean fan club. I think Marcus deserves it more than I do. Damn, I didn't know that was possible. But I'm with you on everything you said, because I like the player as much as you do. Nick Sirianni, and I'm a big fan of the coach. A couple times in the last few weeks, he's kind of puffed his chest a little bit. He's kind of been a little with the media out there and letting people know that they've achieved something. I think last week against McDaniel, because he was getting a little too much shine nationally. The whole, if anybody else can do it, tell them to do it. We run the tush push. And he did so with a smile and a smirk and a turn of his head like, yeah, I'm looking at you guys. Yeah, we can do it. Nobody else can. Smug doesn't work well for Sirianni, and I've seen that a couple of times in the last few weeks. Am I just making this stuff up, or has the coach kind of been smelling himself a little bit of late?
Well, I think Nick has been pretty consistent since the very first press conference, in that he's a huge fan of Nick Sirianni. And I think you kind of have to be to do that job. And the lack of humility compared to other coaches, high-fiving the fans on the field, running up and down, getting in the, we probably haven't seen this kind of coaching well, really ever, when it comes to interaction and talking with the fans and to the fans, and gigging people in the media and that sort of thing, combined with exuberance on the sideline. We've seen back in the 70s, you had a lot of exuberant coaches. So, yeah, again, I can't thank the Philadelphia front offices enough for, since I became a columnist in 2010, and the Phillies were, going out and signing Cliff Lee and having 9 starters, and, then we had to trust the process for years. And then we, all this, the Eagles had this great run, and that starts, I talked about smelling themselves. Howie Roseman and Doug Peterson couldn't smell themselves enough for a year or two. And then they turned into a quarterback factory. Nick Sirianni is gold, Jerry. He is gold for me. He is gold for us. So God bless him. I hope he keeps running up and down the sidelines.
You're looking at through Marcus Hayes' eyes, which I kind of expect you to do. They're your eyes. But I'm asking you to look through other people's eyes, the opposition who's coming in and getting prepped and ready to go against the Eagles. That could he give anybody a little extra motivation with the way that he's been handling it?
Absolutely. I mean, Nick Sirianni, and I don't know that this isn't calculated, and I don't know that he cares, but he very much will be, if he isn't already, one of the most despised coaches.
He's a heel.
On our team.
He's hated everywhere else.
So that absolutely is motivation, especially in football, because football coaches and players have nothing but time. So they are affected disproportionately by the noise and the perception. And you see it all the time in these football coaches. They go crazy at the podium. They know it's coming. They spend 3 days waiting for it. Like, what is it, the Bijan Robinson stuff down in Atlanta?
Oh, yeah, Arthur Smith, baby.
Arthur Smith. I mean, he knew it was coming.
Yeah.
He knew it was coming, And there's one of the great things about, like, dealing with Andy Reid, okay, is that Andy Reid understands that 3 minutes after the press conference shouldn't matter, right? The rest of it, so many other of these guys do not keep the main thing, to borrow Jalen's phrase. The main thing is winning football games, not justifying your decisions that have already been made, whether it's not putting somebody on an injury report, not using them enough, whatever. That's just foolishness and bad leadership. So I do wonder, at some point, will Nick's indulgence of his emotions either backfire or set a tone, if it hasn't already, on this team where there's too much emotion.
And the reason why
we've seen, I did not expect to see Jason Kelce blow up on the sidelines ever.
That's true.
The way he blew up on the sidelines, So there's an interesting sort of alchemy here. When are the coach's emotions a good thing versus a toxic thing?
And the reason why I felt the need to go there this week was because John caught this and brought it to my attention. Nick admitted this week, we're always looking for something to motivate us. We're always, even if we're the underdog, even if we got to make it up, we'll come up with something to get us motivated. So he readily admits that, you come up with stuff to just, even if it's not really there, to try and get the players motivated. Guess what, Nick? You're handing it to the opposition on a silver platter with the way you handle your own business.
I would argue, guys, it's already come up to a certain extent in the loss to the Jets. You saw the over confidence, the over exuberance, 3rd and 9. Zach Wilson's on the other side. Look, if that's Aaron Rodgers, you try to win the game. If that's Zach Wilson, you lay up, you punt the football and say, Zach Wilson, go beat me. It's not going to happen. So I think you already made a mistake from a little bit of that, hubris, confidence, whatever you want to call it. At Inkstained Wretch, make sure you follow Marcus on Twitter, read him, Inquirer.com, listen to him on WIP with Jody occasionally. Not together, but on the same stage.
I'd have no problems doing show with Marcus. Anytime me and Marcus together, I'm down for it.
Radio might explode. The entire industry might crumble if that ever happens.
I'm going to go a different way with you with Nick Sirianni. My final one to you. since that 2-5 start, Marcus, this guy's freaking 27-7. You know how this industry works. And he doesn't have a lot of power when it comes to building the roster. The old Bill Parcells quote. Yeah, if I'm going to cook the dinner, let me buy the groceries. It seems to always happen. The Eagles have this tremendous setup. Howie, we talked about Howie's tremendous at his job, hands the personnel over to Nick Sirianni. At one point, it seems like the ego gets to all these coaches and they want more. They want more power. Is that going to happen with Nick Sirianni?
I don't think so. Doug Peterson didn't want power over personnel. He wanted power over hiring his own staff. Nick already has that. There is precedent in that the Eagles have fired a coach that won a Super Bowl and went to the playoffs recently. They do not view coaches, clearly, they do not view coaches as sacrosanct. And I think they have a shelf life. Jeffrey Lurie's moved quickly, twice.
Yeah.
You know? And I honestly think, like, Nick's a nerd. You know? You've seen him. He is never happier than explaining the mechanics and the theory and the history of a play that Bo Wolf or Zach Berman will ask about and the thought process behind it. And those kinds of coaches are rare, especially when they talk to the media, but they love to teach. They love to coach. And that's what gets them off. Like, there's incredible joy in that. And not many head coaches, NFL coaches are great teachers. And not many have the bandwidth and the humility don't have the bandwidth to do the GM job and don't have the humility to let it be done for them. I said all that to say, no, I don't think Nick is ever going to crave final say. I think he might want more say, and I think they're going to give it to him. One of the things that Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman are pretty good at is listening to people they respect. And the more respect he earns from them when it comes to evaluating players and saying, okay, this guy's going to fit my system because X, Y, or Z, especially on the defensive side of the ball, the more power or say he's going to have. But he'll never supplant Howie. And I like the separation of church and state. And I don't think that he's that cat. I just think he's such a football nerd, such a coaching nerd, that he is going to be sort of happy mainly staying in his lane.
Well, it's a story that we're going to have Marcus Hayes back on to discuss at the end of the season, because at some point you got to talk about an extension for Sirianni too. If they have a good season again, if they win a Super Bowl, forget about it. The extension's a given. If they get close but don't quite get it, what's it going to cost? How long is it going to be? That'll be an interesting conversation. But Commanders first. Over 7.5 sacks. Remember, you heard it here first. Marcus said just under. John said under. Jody Mack said over 7.5 sacks on Sunday. Marcus, always a pleasure, buddy. Thank you much for hanging out with us this morning. We'll do it again soon.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks,
Marcus Hayes, Philadelphia Inquirer, and WIP here with us on 94. On Mac on Birds 365. Right? Yeah.
That was my fault.
Two WIP guys get together and we get WIP on the break. All right, Mac here on Birds 365. Timeout coming. We'll give the props to the opposition going behind enemy lines next hour. Chris Russell from the Commanders Radio Network is going to jump in with us here on Birds 365.